Hello everyone, welcome back to Talking Soccer. I am your host, Justin Horniker. This will also be going up on the podcast feed today in a more full format, so I'll plug that here at the end and just talk about how we're structured. And we are here to talk about the NWSL draft and the fireworks that happened last night. I was exhausted. I wanted to give it a day to really sleep on it, and it'll come with some context of why the Kansas City Current traded Lynn Williams for the number 2 overall pick in last night's draft, which again would turn into Michelle Cooper. So let's get into the Lynn Williams part first. Obviously, it's a bit bittersweet. If you're a Kansas City Current fan, you were excited about the prospect of seeing Lynn Williams and Sam Ewis playing in that roster when those trades were announced last season. Lynn Williams would only get 80 minutes of play in Kansas City's first Challenge Cup game against Racing Louisville last season. Lynn Williams injures her hamstring and ends up having to miss the rest of the season. Now, her presence was definitely looming over the entirety of the season, with rumors that she was inching her way back to training to the point where she actually trained with the team heading into the final of the NWSL championship last season. Now, ultimately, she doesn't return to the team. She doesn't get to play. But I released a video on the channel as well as an article on the Talking Soccer Medium page just talking about how Lynn Williams was coming back to training. She was announced for the USWNT upcoming camp in New Zealand, where she's at right now. So it all seemed to be coming together. The Current signed Abinya. The Current make a lot of signings this offseason and lose Kristen Edmonds. It's been a bit of a turnover. A lot of changes in the wind in Kansas City. So you expect them to kind of roll into the year, see what they have, and go from there. But if we're learning anything about Cammy Levins and how she runs that front office in Kansas City, when they see something they like, they're going to go for it. And from all reports, Kansas City were always interested in picking up Michelle Cooper. Michelle Cooper, sophomore out of Duke, the 20-year-old. She had a fantastic season, 19 goals, 11 assists at Duke last season. She, for the U20 CONCACAF tournament in Havana, or I think Santo Domingo, actually, she won the Golden Boot. She picked up the Best Player of the Tournament award, and this is a tournament that U20 team was pretty stacked. Alyssa Thompson, the player who was the first ever NWSL player to decide that she was going to declare for the draft. Angel City moved heaven and earth, i.e. they traded Yasmin Ryan to the Gotham FC to facilitate this deal. They make it official last night. They signed Alyssa Thompson, and Kansas City see their move. They now know that the number 2 slot, a little bit cheaper than trading into the number 1 slot in Gotham, are willing to bring in some veteran presence into their team. I think this is a deal that works out best for both teams, even if just some things that NWSL players may be looking for in the next collective bargaining agreement. So Lynn Williams gets dealt to Gotham, Kansas City bring in Cooper, and I think Michelle Cooper fits in not just a little late in Duke. She can be a winger, she can be a forward, and that's kind of the mold that Matt Potter likes. But I think, having a young forward to be there, and with the World Cup coming up to where I don't think she's on that level to get the call up. She's definitely not on that level to get the call up to the World Cup. So you'll have a summer where Lynn Williams probably is getting called up, where Dabinya is probably getting called up, where like Claire Laviger, if she's back by then, will probably be called up. And the Kansas City Current have a lot of players who, are kind of at that sub-level underneath the U.S. women's national team level. And I think this helps you out a little bit there, especially Haley Mace is probably gone. A.D. France is probably gone. Desi Scott, if she resigns, is probably gone. Maybe Morgan Gautreau, potentially. So that whole aspect of it is interesting as well, of how the looming World Cup, midseason World Cup that NWSL is going to play through potentially impacts this deal as well. That isn't to say that losing Lynn Williams was always going to hurt. It seemed like Lynn Williams loved playing in Kansas City. Lynn Williams released this statement on Instagram saying, and I don't have any insight into this of whether it was worked out beforehand, just with the knowledge of Angel City was doing all of this to sign Alyssa Thompson. Maybe that number 2 pick is able to be dealt with beforehand, but in normal draft day trade circumstances, you have like 3 minutes, maybe a little bit more discussion beforehand to make the deal. And with Lynn Williams being in New Zealand for the camp, like that's probably believable that she wasn't necessarily told beforehand, which sucks, frankly. And, at some point during the league, we have to get to a point where we're treating players better, as inherently in sports. The transformation that Kansas City has gone through this offseason remind me a lot of what the Vegas Golden Knights did in the NHL, if you follow the NHL, where this expansion team that went from lovable underdogs to powerhouses who just try to go out and sign whoever they want. That's kind of the mold of both teams, and a little bit different in Kansas City Current's case, since their whole bargaining chip is that they have this phenomenal facility. They're building the stadium. They have this club support in the city that not every NWSL club has, but we've seen cases where players aren't necessarily treated with forethought, and that's kind of what you're seeing with Lynn Williams here as well. So RIP to Snacks KC, but I think that Gotham get a lot out of this too, because if Cooper goes to Gotham, I think there's a lot of pressure on her to perform well right now. Not saying that she couldn't do it, but in Kansas City, she's in maybe a little bit more of a guarded territory where if she comes in and is having difficulty adjusting to professional play, there are plenty of players that can take that up, and you have a creative force, one of the best players in the world in Dabinia, who is going to make that a lot easier for you. Whereas in Gotham, in New York, there aren't necessarily, obviously Christy Mewis is great. I think Midge Purce is probably going to put together a MVP level season this year, but there's not that creative player that Dabinia is. Lynn Williams can step in. She has proven that she can create, and paired with the addition of Lynn Williams to that roster helps them in terms of their legitimacy, becoming a playoff contender, helps them a little bit more than Cooper, as much as Cooper is a potential generational face of the club type of player. At least in the right here and now, it helps them a little bit more. But it's one of those things. Do you take the player that's good right now, coming off an injury? So there are some questions there, but Lynn Williams has won NWSL MVP in the past. So it's not like you're trading some veteran player who's pretty good. You're trading a former MVP for a unknown commodity in Michelle Cooper's case, even though that unknown commodity has shown that she has all the accolades in the world. And from what I've seen of her play at Duke, she's phenomenal and the type of player that you move everything to play to pick up. And I think that's what you saw with what Cam Levins did, is that they were willing to trade anything that wasn't Dabinia or AD France to get Michelle Cooper over the line in Kansas City. So that's kind of my thoughts on the trade, my thoughts on draft night. Obviously, the big news, Alyssa Thompson going to LA. I'll do my draft grades here in a separate video. If you're listening on the podcast, you're going to hear that come up next. But it's something that a lot of storylines to come out of it, not just going into the night, but going forward as well. And I think definitely something to pay attention to. These are two players who are now linked for a long time, and in a couple of years, you'll be able to go back and kind of relitigate this trade and see who ended up winning. I think it's hard to say who got the better hand, and I think both teams and that's the sign of a good trade, is that both teams are going to be better off for it. On the flip side, Michelle Cooper is also a little bit less money contractually, so maybe fits under that salary cap a little bit easier. We heard yesterday that the salary cap has actually gone up 25%, Jessica Beeman said, for 2023, which is huge, especially for the amount of money that Kansas City have spent this offseason. But another aspect of the Lynn Williams deal is that Lynn Williams is on a lot of money. So now you have a drafted player, a young player who is a little bit more controlled for the next couple of years. And you also have talks with Desiree Scott that have kind of stalled in the last couple of weeks. So maybe you have to shed a little bit of salary to get that deal over the line. That's the other aspect that we have to think about with this trade. But anyway, let me know what you think down in the comments, what you thought of the NWSL draft. I'll talk a little bit more, like I said, about full team grades here in a bit. But for now, we'll talk very, very soon.